Hello, everyone. This is the 84th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog, and I'm joined by Paul from Shipley in England and the 1888 Letter blog. We are pleased to have Irish freelance writer, historian, and broadcaster, Mr. John O'Carroll, once again on our podcast. For this episode, we continue our interview series with Mr. John O'Carroll as we discuss the matches of the Republic of Ireland national team during the 1987-88 season. Welcome, John, as always. Good to have you.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much, Shahan. Hello to you and to Paul. And once again, all a pleasure and a privilege to be on your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you take us back to the fall of 1987 and the state of the Ireland or the Republic of Ireland national team?
Yes, indeed. Well, Ireland were acknowledged as having a slim chance of qualifying for the Euro 88 finals in West Germany. They had played 6 qualifying matches by then. And, the performances were kind of mixed. There was good performances mixed with somewhat middling performances. And the season just gone, the 86-87 season had been the first full season Jack Charlton was in charge. So I suppose it was taking time, for his style of play to bed in and, for the players to get used to it. And as I say, results up to then had been kind of mixed. And the jury was still very much out, on Jack Charlton's tenure as Republic Van manager. But as we will see in this 87-88 season, things were to turn around in something of quite a spectacular way, in actual fact, because results improved. We ended up qualifying for the Euro 88 finals in West Germany, and as it turned out, we performed quite well in that tournament.
Yes. But I guess as the season kicked off, it seemed like Belgium or even Bulgaria looked more likely to qualify. Was that the takeaway from most Irish fans?
Yes, indeed, Shahan, very much so. You're absolutely correct in that. Belgium and Bulgaria were the two front runners in the group at that stage. And as I said in my last podcast, it would take, what was seen as an unlikely sequence of results to allow the Republic back into qualifying contention. But as you know, this unlikely sequence of results was to happen in the fall of 87. But we really kind of, even though, we had performed solidly in the group and we did have a couple of good results, namely the 2 results away from home, the draw in Belgium back in September of 86 and the win in Scotland in February of 87. Apart from those 2 performances and maybe an unlucky defeat in Bulgaria, the other performances weren't exactly, they weren't exactly overwhelming. I mean, we had been held to disappointing draws at home against both Belgium and Scotland, and we had struggled to win in Luxembourg in May of 1987, and that you see that too was kind of lending itself to the theory that even though we had performed solidly, we weren't going to qualify for the Euros. And the majority of Irish journalists, both in the print and broadcast media, by the time the fall of 87 rolled around, even seemed to subscribe to that view.
Yes. So the first match of the season was the qualifier against Luxembourg at home on September 9th, 1987 at Dublin at Lansdowne Road. So for this match, we have the following lineup. Jerry Payton of Bournemouth in goal. David Langan of Oxford United. This will be his final cap, 26th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1978. Then you have Paul McGrath of Manchester United. Ashley Grimes of Luton. Kevin Moran of Manchester United. Ray Houghton of Oxford United. Liam Brady of West Ham. Ronnie Whelan of Liverpool. Captain of the side, Frank Stapleton, who had joined Ajax in Holland. John Byrne of Queen's Park Rangers, Tony Galvin of Sheffield Wednesday, and he replaced by Niall Quinn of Arsenal in the 65th minute. So this match, Luxembourg surprisingly took the lead in the 29th minute through Armin Krings. But just a few minutes later, in the 32nd minute, uh, Frank Stapleton tied the match when he headed in Ashley Grimes' cross from the left side. And Ireland would only score the winner near the end in the 76th minute. Uh, Paul McGrath scored when a cross or overhead volley from the left side was headed back, and McGrath volleyed that in. So Ireland narrowly won against the weakest team in the group, and uh, somewhat kept pace, although not knowing at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this was the first kind of time where kind of Ireland, the deficiencies, shall we say, in the Irish team were kind of brought into sharp focus in that. I mean, it was the first time I think that it became clearly evident to everyone that goal scoring was a major problem with us. I mean, we struggled to beat Luxembourg. I mean, a Luxembourg team that were at that stage, not much more than whipping boys in the group. We actually fell behind, as you pointed out, in that game, and we could have even fallen further behind. And I remember even as a young lad watching the highlights of that game that night on TV, and yes, it was a far from convincing Irish performance. And, it raised questions once again about, Jack Charlton's philosophy of play, in that, Belgium and Bulgaria had put up big scores against Luxembourg up in their previous games. But, I mean, we just, in this case, scraped a 2-1 win. And if you want to couple that with our less than overwhelming performance in the return game the previous May in Luxembourg. I mean, we only had scored 4 goals against Luxembourg in 2 matches. Yeah. Whereas, for example, Belgium had scored 6 in 1 game, and Bulgaria had, put up a couple of big scores against Luxembourg as well in their matches. So yeah, this game really brought into sharp focus, kind of the deficiencies, shall we say, in Ireland's style of play. Now, Jack Charlton said after the game, he was of the opinion that, to quote him, he said, "We wrinkled a result." And he also said that Luxembourg were well organised, but taking the Irish performance into account, that seemed something of a far-fetched assumption to have. And the Luxembourg manager, Paul Philippe, he then said in an interview after the game, he was of the opinion that the Irish game was too stereotyped. In other words, he said, you were only looking for your strikers up front. And he said Luxembourg could have easily had a draw. A respected journalist in the Irish Independent newspaper, then Vincent Hogan, he started his report on the game by saying that Ireland approached Luxembourg like a prince would approach a pauper. In other words, Ireland, maybe there was a bit of complacency, and maybe they thought that Luxembourg were just going to roll over and that Ireland would have an easy win. But as we saw, it was a far from convincing performance. And in many ways, if if I can compare, shall we say, the performance, seeing that Jack Charlton, and if I can compare it, say, to a performance that England had under Don Revie in the autumn 1976 when they played Finland at Wembley. They were expected to win quite easily. They ended up struggling to win 2-1, and it culminated in Don Revie, apologising over the public address to the Wembley crowd. I mean, this was something you could say in many respects very similar to that. Ireland were expected to win handsomely, but this was far from the case. And you see, by winning handsomely, we would have given our faint qualification hopes a boost, because we had the worst goal difference of the main contenders for the qualification spot in the group. So it was imperative that we won, and won well. But this was not to happen. We ended up scraping a result. And what a lot of the Irish journalists, whatever lingering hopes they had of us qualifying, I think were more or less extinguished after this performance, because it was going to take, as I said already, something of an unlikely sequence of results to put us back into qualifying contention. So there was only 18,000 present at the game, so that would indicate as well that maybe a lot of supporters kind of had given up the ghost on Ireland qualifying at that stage. Disappointing performance. The man the match actually was a guy from Luxembourg. He was called Linus. He was actually one of the midfield players. And as I say, after this underwhelming performance, hope of qualifying seemed extinguished.
Yes. So the following qualifier was a much sterner test. On October 14th, Ireland played their last qualifier of the Euros versus Bulgaria, again at Dublin at Lansdowne Road. So for this match, we have Paddy Bonner of Celtic in goal, Paul McGrath, Mick McCarthy of Celtic, Kevin Moran, Ronnie Whelan, Ray Houghton, Mark Lawrenson of Liverpool, Liam Brady, who would be sent off in the 84th minute. More on that later. Tony Galvin, he'd be replaced by John Byrne of Queen's Park Rangers in the 77th minute. Captain beside Frank Stapleton. John Aldridge of Liverpool, and he replaced by Niall Quinn in the 77th minute. So Ireland had to wait until the second half. In the 52nd minute, Paul McGrath gave the team a lead when he knocked in a loose ball after the Bulgarian goalkeeper had mishandled a cross from the right side. And they would wait until the last 5 minutes in the 85th minute when Kevin Moran headed in John Burns' cross from the right side to give Ireland a convincing 2-0 win. But again, at this point, their destiny was still out of their hands. But I guess at this point, given the fact that the qualification was seen as to be somewhat unlikely, I'm assuming Liam Brady's sending off was not as seen as significant in the immediate aftermath, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Shahan, there were 26,000 people present, which was, an improvement in attendance from the game against Luxembourg. I suppose it was seen in some respects kind of as, Ireland's it was Ireland's last game in the group, and maybe it was seen as, the last opportunity for them to kind of sign off with hopefully a good performance. Now, prior to this game, just to rewind quickly, on the 23rd of September, 3 weeks previous, Bulgaria had played Belgium in Sofia, and Bulgaria won that game 2-0. So that put a dent in Belgium's prospects of qualifying. And it also now meant that Bulgaria, at this stage, were in pole position for the qualification spot. Now, you could say kind of, if the Luxembourg performance, was a whimper, this Bulgaria performance certainly was very much a bang, because it was a very improved performance. For once, the Irish, or the typical Irish qualities of pride, passion, and total commitment were in evidence. And Jack Charlton, actually, he referred to a similar sort of lineup and game plan as he did against Scotland in Hampden Park the previous February, when Ireland, achieved a famous 1-0 victory. So in many ways, maybe the way to go at that stage for Jack Charlton was to, employ the same formation and the same tactics that he had employed both against Scotland the previous February and in this game against Bulgaria. Because in many ways, it was the first time under Jack that Ireland played with the passion that, is supposedly the Irish native trademark. And the final score was 2-0, but it could very well have been 4-0, or indeed it would not even have over-flattered us, if we had scored 5 or 6, which would have been a big boost to the goal difference situation as well. Now, Paul McGrath, Ronnie Whelan, and Mark Lawrenson, as you mentioned, they were all played out of their customary club positions, and they all played quite well. Ronnie Whelan, I think, once again was playing at left back, as he did, the previous February against Scotland. Now, you mentioned about Liam Brady sending off. Well, this, was the first and only sending off under Jack Charlton's tenure. And I think as regards the sending off itself, it was just more or less a case of Liam Brady, kind of retaliating to some, petty fouls from the Bulgarians, and he just happened to, snap, and he kicked out at a Bulgarian opponent and got sent off as a result. And Jack, there's a famous picture, and you may even see it on YouTube, of as Liam Brady is sent off. Jack walks onto the field, meets Liam Brady, puts his arm around his shoulder, and they walk off to the touchline. So that, was acknowledgement of the performance and the shift that Liam Brady put in this particular game. So it was a good victory. Bulgaria were a decent enough team at the time. They had some players that featured in Mexico '86, and of course they had a young and emerging Hristo Stoichkov in the lineup. Although he was still something of an unknown in the Western world at this stage. It was only in later years he was to come to prominence, and what a player he turned out to be. But for now, anyway, as I say, it was a welcome win. It revived our chances of qualifying. But later that night, Shahan, even though this was not seen as significant at the time, a very significant game took place in Hampden Park between Scotland and Belgium, and Scotland won that game 2-0. So by the time the Scotland-Belgium game was over, Ireland had something of, a slim but a more realistic chance of qualifying than they had up to now, because Scotland's win over Belgium, I should say, meant that Belgium were out of the running. And I mean, all that meant was that if Scotland could beat Bulgaria the following month, Ireland would actually win the group and end up qualifying for the Euros. So, a lot of people, in Irish folklore, a lot of people put Ireland qualifying down to the fact that Scotland beat Bulgaria and that Scotland done us a favour. But in actual fact, I would contend that Scotland actually done us a double favour, in that, they had beaten Belgium as well, because, I mean, if Belgium had won that game against Scotland, who had nothing to play for at that stage, Belgium would more than likely have qualified, because Belgium would have had Luxembourg in their final game. So, Belgium would have overtaken us on goal difference. But as it was anyway, it was a welcome win over Bulgaria. Put us, even though a slim chance of qualifying, we were still in with a chance at that stage if Scotland, as I say, could beat Bulgaria the following month. And I suppose it kind of, once again revived, confidence and revived, belief, shall we say, in the Irish team and in the style of play that Jack Charlton was, espousing. Because I did say in my previous podcast that, in Jack's first season in charge, we tended to follow a good performance with, shall we say, a mediocre or middling performance. But you could equally say that we seem to follow a mediocre or middling performance with a good performance. So that really was the takeaway from that game. The game, even though it was a key game in terms of qualifying for the Irish, it wasn't televised live in Ireland. And that, I suppose, could be partly down to the fact that, there was 26,000 present, which meant that Lansdowne Road was far from full. But yeah, I mean, and even if we want to qualify, there was a belief there that, kind of maybe, finally, maybe we were starting to gain a little bit of respect, in international soccer circles. We were going to finish the qualifying group regardless anyway, with 11 points out of 16, which, all told, was a reasonably good haul.
Sorry, John, I was just going to ask about about Liam Brady. I mean, the sending off was quite out of character for him. I think we should say, first of all, he certainly wasn't that sort of player.
No.
But what were the consequences for him and his relationship with Jack Charlton as a result?
Yeah, well, the consequences were, Paul, of course, as we all know, as it turned out, Ireland qualified for Euro 88, and Liam Brady got a two match ban, which meant that he was going to miss the first 2 games of Euro 88 anyway. But in the run up to Euro 88, Liam got injured. Playing club football, so that would have meant that he would have missed Euro 88 anyway. So as regards his his relationship with Jack from then on, I suppose from then on, Paul, you could say that Lee more or less sort of became a big part player under Jack. In that Jack, you see, had to plan for Euro 88 and indeed Euro 88 itself without Liam. And by the time Euro 88 was over, Jack had something of a settled team, which didn't feature Liam Brady. So it was going to be very hard for Liam Brady, to break back into the team post Euro 88 at any rate. And then, of course, as you know, Liam was in his 30s at this stage and age was beginning to catch up with him, But, I mean, if Liam hadn't been sent off in the game against Bulgaria and subsequently Hank got injured, I believe he would have played, quite a significant role in West Germany in the European Championships, because even Jack acknowledged in the aftermath of the Bulgaria game that Liam, had adapted his game to the way Jack wanted him to play. And, he had performed quite well against Bulgaria, but unfortunately, kind of something of, I suppose, an out of character sending off, kind of tarnished that a little bit. And as you say, Paul, it did ultimately, even though it wasn't seen at the time, it did have far-reaching consequences, both for Liam's career in an Ireland jersey and his subsequent relationship with Jack. Yeah, I should point out as well, lads, that of course, you mentioned there about Liam Brady, missing Euro 88 and that he was going to be a loss, but an equally bigger loss as well, even though, again, this wasn't evident at the time, was the loss of Mark Lawrenson. I mean, he subsequently got injured in the spring of 1988, and he was to miss the European Championships as well. So, I mean, they were going to be two huge losses, for the Republic, namely, Liam Brady and Mark Lawrenson. So, I mean, if we had those 2 players in the Irish team, it's open to conjecture, what we would have achieved at the Euro finals in Germany.
Yes. So at this point, Ireland were finished with their qualifiers, and the decisive Bulgaria-Scotland match was scheduled in November. Ireland seemed likely to miss out on the Euros despite having a slim chance. Now, were there any calls to have Jackie Charlton sacked at this point, or had he done enough to survive, you think?
Well, I think the performance against Bulgaria kind of meant that he had done enough to survive for now. Because as I said, even though we were seen as maybe in all likelihood not going to qualify, certainly the performance against Bulgaria, was a redeeming factor, because I think certainly, kind of if say, the performance against Bulgaria had been poor and we hadn't won that game, I think the calls for maybe, a change in management, and a replacement of manager, I think would have certainly gained a crescendo. But as I say, the performance against Bulgaria, people, I think at that stage, they were just maybe content just to maybe, kind of let him there and wait and see what the World Cup qualifiers would throw up at us. Because, in fairness to Jack, what I will say is, I mean, when he did take the job, he did say that qualifying for the 1990 World Cup was his main aim. And he said if we were to qualify for Euro 88, it would be a bonus. So, I mean, you could say, and I mean, he could justifiably make the argument that he was using the Euro 88 campaign, to kind of, instill his style of play on the team and get players to gel and to bed into it. So, the general consensus was that, people were maybe content at this stage anyway to, leave things be anyway for another qualifying campaign and then maybe make a judgment on him at the end of the World Cup qualifying campaign.
Yes. So with no qualifiers, we have one friendly in November. On November 10th, 1987, at Dublin, at Delaman Park, Ireland hosted Israel. So for this match, we have a new cap in goal, Callum O'Hanlon of Rotherham United. And this would be his one and only cap for the Republic. And we have Chris Morris of Celtic, Mick McCarthy, Kevin Moran, Chris Hughton of Tottenham, Ray Houghton, by now he had joined Liverpool, and he'd be replaced by Liam O'Brien of Manchester United in the 74th minute. Captaining the side, Mark Lawrenson of Liverpool. This would be his final cap for the Republic, his 39th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1977. John Byrne, Kevin Sheedy of Everton, Niall Quinn, and another new cap, David Kelly, who would celebrate with a hat trick. So Ireland won this match 5-0. John Byrne scored in the 13th minute. David Kelly scored a hat trick in the 41st, 56th, and a penalty kick in the 71st minute. And Niall Quinn in the 83rd minute. So 5-0 win over Israel.
David Kelly at Walsall at this time, Sean.
David Kelly, yes, he was at Walsall. Yes, correct.
So he's a third division player, yeah.
That's right, he subsequently went to West Ham, of course, and in 8 years then played for Newcastle for a period. But he was a third division player with Walsall. So, I mean, to score a hat-trick on his international debut, was quite something, even though admittedly, Israel in those days, would have been seen as inferior opposition. But the game was played in Dalymount Park, which was kind of a change from the norm. Because I suppose maybe, Israel weren't seen as great crowd pullers at that time. Jack Charlton used the match to experiment. And as you say, Callum O'Hanlon got his first and only cap. Actually, Callum O'Hanlon kind of was, as it turned out, he was somewhat hard done by because, Callum, even though this was his first and only cap, he was in a number of Irish squads up to then, and he would have been in a number of Irish squads after this game. He was very much the third choice goalkeeper behind Packy Bonner and Jerry Payton. But Callum never went to a tournament as a squad member because in Euro 88, I think was it a 20-man squad or something tended to be the norm, yes. and two goalkeepers went. And for the World Cup in 1990, then Callum was still performing with Rotherham, but for that World Cup, Jack Charlton opted to take two goalkeepers rather than three, because he opted to take an extra outfield player instead. So, as I say, Callum was very much third choice. So I think this cap was very much kind of seen as maybe a reward to his loyalty and being involved in several squads, kind of without making an appearance up then, and wasn't to make an appearance since. But it was overdue recognition of him, because I mean, when you are knocking around squads for a number of years, I mean, I suppose in many ways you do deserve an appearance at some stage. So it was, acknowledgement for Callum. And of course, David Kelly then, kind of, he suddenly came on the international scene with a bang, kind of scoring a hat-trick on his debut. And that, of course, helped to raise his profile, in English domestic soccer as well. So, as I say, there was only highlights of the game shown. So it's kind of hard to kind of, form a definitive takeaway from this game. Obviously, Jack used it, as a chance to experiment. Israel was somewhat quite poor at this stage at international level. But of course, it goes without saying, the most significant result of all took place the following day in Sofia when, in that famous game, Scotland beat Bulgaria with a late Gary Mackay goal. And that game actually, RTE, who were the Irish television station, the National Irish Television Station, they took a gamble on this game and decided to televise it live, kind of maybe in the faint hope that, history might be made and Scotland might pull off, an unexpected win. And as it turned out, so everybody in Ireland got to see the Scotland-Bulgaria game. And as it turned out, history was made because, thanks to Gary Mackay, late goal, Ireland ended up qualifying for Euro 88. Now, I think actually this game as well was shown, I think, it would have been shown in Scotland and possibly some parts of England as well, because there is, a well-known anecdote that Jack Charlton actually was watching this game, and about halfway through the game, or maybe with about half an hour gone in the first half, he received a phone call from an Irish journalist, congratulating him on Ireland qualifying. And Jack said, no, he said, the game is only half an hour in progress. And the journalist told him that the game was over and Scotland had indeed won. So that would indicate that there was a delayed transmission of it, shown in some parts of England. Although, again, you see kind of, I suppose we can only go on Jack's word on this, so, yeah. But yeah, I mean, kind of a historic moment, for the first time, as I say, Ireland had qualified for a major tournament finals. And of course we can, kind of, there's a long-standing joke going around in Ireland, kind of that maybe the most famous goals in Irish soccer history were actually scored by Scotsmen, because you see you had Ray Houghton, of course, scoring both at Euro 88 and again in USA 94. And then, of course, you got Gary Mackay scoring for Scotland in this game against Bulgaria. So, yeah.
Just before we move on to the qualification, John, we'd mentioned that this was Mark Lawrenson's last cap. Can you just say a bit about his career for the national team and his place in Irish football history?
Yeah, I mean, kind of, unfortunately, as even though it wasn't foreseen at the time, kind of Mark was to miss the Euro 88 finals due to an injury he picked up, which in many ways, I suppose, maybe went a long way towards, ending his career. But, yeah, I mean, he had a distinguished enough career in an Irish shirt. He was capped for the first time way back in 1977, and he opted to declare for Ireland, kind of at a time when I suppose it wasn't fashionable, to play for the Republic. And indeed, he was always proud to play for Ireland, and even even shall we say in the nadir of Ireland's soccer history, namely at the end of the Owen Handy era, in the fall of 1985 and the start of 86, kind of, even though Ireland was struggling at international level, Mark always maintained publicly that the Irish team had some of the best players in Europe, and he said, he reckoned it was only a matter of time before we were going to become a major international force. So, as I say, he was always delighted and proud to play for Ireland. And of course, his versatility served him well as well. You see, he played in, I suppose he played in all positions across the back four. And, in his early part of his own career, he would have played in midfield as well. And, he was quite an adaptable player. He was equally at home in midfield as he was in defence. So, yeah, I mean, all in all, kind of an outstanding servant for the Republic of Ireland. And I suppose, I suppose one of their best ever players.
Yeah, and maybe a little like Liam Brady, it was a little unfortunate that he was kind of entering the twilight of his career just as the team were really improving and qualifying for major tournaments.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I mean, hindsight is a great thing, but I suppose if he hadn't been snapped up by the Irish back in 1977, I have no doubt that he would have featured for England at some stage, And actually, how he ended up playing for Ireland was that in 1977 he was an up and coming player at Preston, and Alan Kelly who was a former Irish international goalkeeper. He was a manager. He was on the coaching staff for Preston at this time, and he was also Johnny Giles's assistant. He was the assistant manager to the Republic of Ireland. So he notified John Giles that Mark Lawrenson qualified through his Irish-born mother, and John Giles subsequently called him up. So that was how Mark ended up playing for the Republic.
So describe how the Irish population celebrated after Gary Mackay's late winner versus Bulgaria on this night of November 11.
Well, I mean, kind of it gave the country, a massive and unexpected boost. I mean, for the first time, there was a sense of excitement in the country and among the soccer fraternity in that, we had finally qualified for a tournament finals, and it was going to be fascinating to see, how we would perform. Well, of course, I mean, we still didn't know we didn't know until the following January who we were going to be playing in the finals. But, there was a feeling of excitement, and, even though we were going to be outsiders, and rightly so, I mean, there was a belief there, certainly amongst the Irish players, and, perhaps amongst some of the knowledgeable Irish soccer fraternity as well, that if we could, give it our best shot in the Euros in Germany, and we were capable of performing well, as we have seen in the games against Bulgaria and the away games against Belgium and Scotland, that, if we were to perform to the maximum of our abilities, there was I won't say there was going to be nothing to fear, but there was a feeling there that we weren't going to be the whipping boys that we were perceived as going to be across, shall we say, the rest of Europe, because I mean we had a decent international team at that stage, albeit with limitations, shall we say, in our style of play, but I mean we had decent players, and with a bit of luck and maybe I suppose hard graft and determination, there was a feeling there that we could do reasonably well, at the Euros, even though obviously, qualification out of the group stages at the Euros was going to be a huge ask. But there was an overall feeling there that, even though we were outsiders, we weren't going to disgrace ourselves either. And we weren't going to end up as the tournament whipping boys. So yeah, that would have been the general view.
Did this give greater significance to Liam Brady's sending off and suspension now that the Republic had qualified? And was there any, I suppose there might have been a feeling of injustice that the best Irish player of his generation was going to miss out? Was there any attempt to get the suspension rescinded that you know of?
Not that I know of, Paul. Because in those days, kind of suspensions kind of tended to be clear cut. Kind of, and a straight red card kind of was really kind of, I suppose, non-appealable. And still very much is. But like he was going to miss the first two games of the Euro, so would Jack maybe have subsequently even have taken him just for one game? I don't know. Now, as it turned out, and as I said earlier, Liam subsequently got injured, so that put paid to his chances of playing in the Euros anyway. And, I suppose it was to have unforeseen, far-reaching consequences both for his subsequent career in the Ireland jersey and his relationship with Jack Charlton. But for now anyway, kind of, even though, he was going to be a loss, I mean, the overall feeling was, we had qualified, and, there was going to be opportunities through the upcoming friendly games in the spring of 88, for other players, to kind of fill Liam Brady's role, and for other players, to bid into the system, and maybe a chance as well, for Jack Charlton to try and negate Liam's absence by maybe tweaking his style of play somewhat. Because we have to remember as well, Paul, that, under Jack, Liam wasn't kind of, playing as an attacking midfielder as we were used to seeing him play at club level. He was more or less seen kind of as a holding player in front of the back four. So, his creativity in an Irish jersey under Jack was limited anyway. Yeah.
So, Ireland's first friendly of the New Year, first preparatory friendly of the New Year 1988 was against Romania in March. Now, can you walk us through the incident involving Graham Souness that was a backdrop into this match? Graham Souness, the player manager for Rangers Glasgow. So Rangers Glasgow were paired with Stoia Bucharest, the Romanian side,
Yeah, that's
for the
right.
Champions Cup.
Yeah.
So Graham Souness made a dangerous foul on the Romanian Josef Rotariu of Stoia Bucharest. It was a vicious foul. I'm sure we've all seen the highlights. So, as a protest, all of Stoia Bucharest players, which would form the backbone of the Romanian national team, they boycotted this match against the Republic of Ireland. So that's why if you look at the Romanian lineup, it's some unknown players, some players who were recalled after a few years away from the national team. So it's not the full strength Romanian side for this match. And
Yeah.
it all stemmed from Graham Souness's foul.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it made a
Well,
lot of headlines at the time, this incident. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I recall vaguely that foul taking place, but I didn't realize it had such an impact, on this particular game. But, Shahan, even if, excuse me, if Graham Souness had never committed that foul, whether the Stoia players would have played in this game anyway is open to question, because Stoia had qualified for the semi-finals of the European Cup by now. So would Stoia have rested their players, in anticipation of the upcoming European Cup semi-final? It's sort of open to conjecture a little bit as well.
Yes. So, but let's get to this match on March 23rd at Dublin at Lansdowne Road. So, for this match, we have Paddy Bonner, Chris Morris, Mick McCarthy, Chris Anderson of Mick McCarthy would be replaced by Chris Anderson of Newcastle in the 46th minute.
Sorry, Shahan, was it John Anderson?
John Anderson. My apologies. It's John Christopher Anderson. Sorry about that. Yeah, you're right.
No problem.
John Anderson. Yeah. So in the 46th minute, Kevin Moran, Ashley Grimes, Tony Galvin. He replaced by Liam O'Brien in the 65th minute. John Byrne. Making his international debut, John Sheridan of Leeds. Kevin Sheedy. Captain of the side, Frank Stapleton. By now, after his disappointing spell at Ajax, he was now playing at Derby County. Actually, believe it or not, in between his Ajax and Derby spell, he actually joined Anderlecht in Belgium.
Okay.
He had a disappointing spell as well, so he finally joined Derby County, where he was much happier. And he'd be replaced by Niall Quinn in the 53rd minute and David Kelly of Walsall. And this was the final cap for Ashley Grimes, his 18th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1978. So Ireland won this match 2-0. In the 30th minute, Kevin Moran scored from off of John Sheridan's corner from the left side. And Ireland doubled the lead in the very last minute when Kelly headed in Kevin Sheedy's cross from the left side. So a convincing win, but we have to remember it was against an understrength Romanian side.
Yeah, that's correct, Shahan. Convincing win, and I suppose further vindication for Jack Charlton. Kind of that his style and philosophy of play, was beginning to bear fruit and produce positive results. A debut, as you said, for John Sheridan, and of course, John Sheridan was to prove his worth as an international player in later years. But at this stage, he was still very much an up-and-coming player. So the European Championships were going to come too soon for him. Because as I said, he was still only an up-and-coming player at this stage, and I suppose playing a couple of friendlies before the tournament meant that in all likelihood he wasn't going to make a significant impact. But I suppose Jack would have seen him at this stage anyway as one for the future. David Kelly, as you mentioned, of course, scored again. So, I mean, in his second international appearance, he already had 4 goals by now. Which was good going for a third division player. But Ashley Grimes, you said this was his last game. Now, Ashley subsequently got injured. So if he hadn't got injured, he may well have been in the Euro 88 squad as well. But as I say, he got subsequently injured, and this was to be his last game. But not much highlights of this game exist. So as I say, it's impossible again to be definitive on the Irish performance. But all told anyway, and by all accounts anyway, it was a good performance. I mean, admittedly, Romania were under strength, but equally, Ireland were under strength too. It was, in an overall sense, by all accounts, a drab, disappointing game. So I suppose really apart from, several players getting a run out and maybe, a good walk out of that, and of course Ireland winning the game, I suppose there was very little else to take away from it. I suppose we should point out as well that perhaps, in this game and in the subsequent friendly games leading up to the Euros, naturally enough, a lot of Irish players were anxious to play in the Euros. So maybe, they might have been minding themselves a little bit in these games, kind of making sure that they wouldn't, pick up unnecessary injuries or indeed suspensions or anything like that. So maybe there was a little bit of that as well.
Ashley Grimes was another player who was maybe nearing the end of his career.
Yeah.
At this point, and he'd been around a long time. Can you describe his contribution to the national team?
Yeah. He made a contribution. He started with Manchester United, and then of course by the time 1988 rolled around, he was with Luton Town. He actually played for Luton that year in their Littlewoods Cup victory over Arsenal. I think he may have scored one of the goals, I think, for Luton that day. I'm not entirely sure on that, but yeah, he did make a significant contribution. Even though he wasn't really a regular first teamer for the Republic. He was, I suppose, in many ways, in today's terms, I suppose you could regard him as something of an impact substitute. But yeah, he did make a contribution. Scored a few goals over the years for the Republic in the process, and yeah, was a more than adequate midfield player all told.
So the next friendly is on April 27th, this time against Yugoslavia, again at Dublin and Lansdowne Road. So for this match, we have Paddy Bonner, Chris Morris, Mick McCarthy, Kevin Moran, Chris Houghton. He replaced by John Anderson in the 55th minute. Ray Houghton, Paul McGrath, John Sheridan. Making his international debut, Mark Kelly of Portsmouth. He'd be replaced by Liam O'Brien in the 89th minute. Captain of the team, Frank Stapleton. David Kelly. He'd be replaced by John Byrne in the 79th minute. So Ireland won this match again 2-0. Mick McCarthy scored in the 23rd minute and Kevin Moran in the 63rd minute. So another convincing win.
Yeah, another convincing win. And, against, shall we say, I suppose maybe, well, kind of a decent enough Yugoslavia team at that stage. Of course, Yugoslavia, I suppose, they were kind of building as well towards the 1990 World Cup. So they were, I suppose, putting the foundations of that 1990 World Cup team in place as well. So they did have a number of, they did have 3 or 4, kind of well-known or reasonably known players at the time. Yeah, and players that, subsequently came to prominence in later years. But, yeah, to answer your question, Shahan, it was another good performance. Another, morale-boosting victory, which, was inspiring confidence, and it was building up a belief in the team ahead of the upcoming European Championships.
Yes.
Again, there's only highlights available. The game wasn't televised live in Ireland, so brief highlights that we have, just little, one can definitively say on the performance. But yeah, I mean, again, it was an opportunity for Jack to experiment a little and try out certain players and maybe give one or two new caps. And so I suppose from that point of view, it was a mission accomplished in that respect.
Yes.
And I mean, it was also given, the new caps, a chance to, experience, I suppose, a senior international football and experience, the Jet Charlton way of playing, and allowing them maybe the opportunity to bid into that. Excuse me. Just before we conclude in this, Shahan, just to point out that this Yugoslavia game, it was Ireland's 7th win in a row. A solid performance, but only 12,000 people present, which, for a team that was about to go to the Euros, was something of a disappointing attendance, Yeah.
Yeah. So the next friendly was on May 22nd, again at Dublin at Lansdowne Road, this time against Poland. So for this match, we have Jerry Payton in goal, Chris Morris, Paul McGrath. He replaced by Niall Quinn in the 54th minute. Captaining the side this time, Kevin Moran, Chris Houghton, Tony Galvin. He'd replaced by Liam O'Brien in the 63rd minute. Ronnie Whelan. He'd replaced by John Byrne in the 56th minute. John Sheridan. He'd replaced by Mark Kelly in the 63rd minute. Kevin Sheedy, John Aldridge, and Tony Cascarino of Millwall. So Ireland took the lead in the 12th minute from a Kevin Sheedy free kick. They doubled the lead in the 31st minute when Ronnie Whelan's free kick from the right side was headed in by Cascarino. And they scored a third goal in the 40th minute when John Aldridge's cross from the right side was touched down by Cascarino towards Sheridan, who knocked it in. And in the second half, Poland pulled one goal back through Robert Warzicka, who would later join Everton.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So convincing end of the season win. And this was, I guess, the 8th consecutive win now for Ireland.
Yeah, 8 consecutive wins. So momentum was, building up. And of course, it was the return, from the international wilderness of Tony Cascarino. I believe actually this was his first game under Jack Charlton. His previous performance or his previous appearance for Ireland had been back in 1985 under Owen Hand. So, he was very much the forgotten man at international level. But at this stage, he was still performing well for Gillingham. And this culminated in his call-up for this particular game. But, yeah, I mean, a good performance, the 8th successive win in a row. And, for people that were kind of, keeping an eye on the Republic of Ireland team, I mean, this was further proof that, Ireland weren't going to the West Germany for the Euros just to make up the numbers. I mean, they were a decent enough international team, and with a bit of luck, in the Euros they would acquit themselves quite well. Now, Bobby Robson was actually at this Ireland-Poland game because the previous day England had beaten Scotland in the Rouse Cup game at Wembley. So Bobby took the opportunity to hop across to Dublin to take in the Ireland-Poland game the following day, and he was quite impressed with the Irish performance. But actually, Tony Cascarino came in because in no small part due to the fact that Ashley Grimes had, been injured by this stage. So I suppose Ashley's, well, I won't say fall from grace, but Ashley's demise at international level was certainly Tony Cascarino's gain.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the last friendly before the Euros was in Oslo on June 1st against Norway. So this would be a scoreless tie. For this match, we have Paddy Bonner, Chris Morris, Mick McCarthy, Kevin Moran, Chris Houghton, Ray Houghton, Paul McGrath, Ronnie Whelan, Tony Galvin. He's replaced by John Sheridan in the 74th minute. captain beside Frank Stapleton. He replaced by Tony Cascarino in the 62nd minute. John Aldridge. So
Yeah. This game, it was the final friendly before the Euros, and it actually was televised live in Ireland. Which was the first time I'd say in over a year that an Ireland game had been televised live. I remember the performance quite well. It was a drab, dour, disappointing performance. Ireland over the years, and we only saw it there on Thursday night last. Historically they've always, for some reason, seemed to struggle against Norway. I think in no small part to the fact that traditionally Norway seemed to play a traditional style of soccer to us, and I suppose maybe a style that was very much akin to the Jack Charlton philosophy of playing soccer. So Ireland over the years have always struggled against the Norwegians, and this was no different. As I say, the only difference this time was it was a friendly. There was no qualification points at stake, and I suppose the overriding, factor in this game was, it was the last chance for players to. It was the final run out, of course, before the Euros, and I suppose maybe some players were obviously, trying to avoid, getting injured. So that they would be able to play in the Euros. But disappointing game. Cascarino had a goal disallowed in the latter stages of the game, which possibly could have been given. But apart from that, it was quite a boring game, and there was little or no takeaways from it, to be totally honest, except, it was another solid defensive performance. And, even though we were hoping for 9 victories in a row, but that came to an end. But, in the preceding 9 games, we only had conceded, I should say, 2 goals. And I mean, that was a plus as well, because, I mean, whatever about our problems scoring goals, our goals against rate, had dropped quite considerably. So, I mean, when you have, a tight goals against rate, you're always going to have a chance, of maybe getting a draw or even nicking a victory, even with, goal scoring deficiencies.
yes. So now we come to the Euros. This is
Yes.
Republic of Ireland's full squad for the 1988 Euros, a 20-man squad. We have at number 1, Paddy Bonner, number 2, Chris Morris, number 3, Chris Hughton, number 4, Mick McCarthy, number 5, Kevin Moran, number 6, Ronnie Whelan, number 7, Paul McGrath, number 8, Ray Houghton, number 9, John Aldridge, number 10, Frank Stapleton, Tony Galvin, number 12, Tony Cascarino, number 13, Liam O'Brien, number 14, David Kelly, number 15, Kevin Sheedy, number 16, the backup goalkeeper, Jared Payton, number 17, John Byrne, number 18, John Sheridan, number 19, John Anderson, and number 20, Niall Quinn. Now, besides Liam Brady, for obvious reasons, were there any surprises or noteworthy omissions in this final selection?
Well, I suppose obviously Mark Lawrenson, of course, who had been injured by this stage, I mean, he would have been an automatic inclusion. And of course, Ashley Grimes had got injured as well. So Ashley could well have been in the squad as well. But apart from that, the squad was very much along expected lines. And of course, David O'Leary was something of the forgotten man at this stage because he was still excluded. But because I suppose the fact that the team were going well, sort of kind of, I suppose in many ways, his absence wasn't as keenly felt at this time. Now, as it turned out, maybe, as time was to go on, people started to question his absence by this stage. So really, I suppose Mark Lawrenson through injury and David O'Leary through exclusion would have been the notable absentees. But apart from that, the squad would have been more or less along expected lines. Considering what was available to Jack at the time.
After the first match with England,
Yeah.
was the general consensus On both sides, that England were likely to win. Would you say, was that the feeling in Ireland as well?
Yeah, that was very much the feeling, Paul. I mean, it was accepted or acknowledged before the tournament that, England, in many ways, in Ireland, England were seen as favourites to qualify from the group because they had performed quite well in qualification, and they were even being tipped by in some quarters, as having the capability of going all the way to the final. And of course, the Dutch were very much up, and they were resurging again after a couple of years, kind of missing international tournaments. And of course, the USSR, they were always going to be strong and difficult to beat. So Ireland were very much seen as outsiders in the group. But a lot of Irish supporters, their expectations were quite realistic. I mean, they weren't expecting us to win the tournament, or perhaps maybe to qualify from the group, but a lot would have been content just to settle with victory over England in the opening game. Now, of course, there was a kind of something of a subplot to this Ireland game as well, Paul, because you may recall Jack Charlton back in 1977. He had applied for the England manager's job, and at the time he didn't even I believe receive a reply to his application. So even though he downplayed it subsequently and didn't speak much about it, those that were close to him, said that he always had this kind of desire to subsequently prove the English wrong, and this would have been no doubt motivating Jack in the lead up to this game as well. Now, of course, there is, the common perception in Ireland was that, out of this entire Euros tournament, we ended up with 3 points, and in many ways we sort of got what we deserved on the overall balance of play, because the general widespread view is, and it's easy to agree with, is that in West Germany we won the game we should have lost, which was the game against England. We drew the game that we should have won, which was the game against the USSR, and we lost the game that we should have drawn against the Dutch. So, yeah, I mean, in an overall sense, I suppose, kind of, a win, a draw, and a loss in the 3 games was, kind of adequate enough, a summation of our performances. But yeah, going back to this England game, of course, this was going to be so historic because, I mean, it was Ireland's first tournament game, major tournament game at that, and the fact that it was against England, of course, added more spice to the occasion. Now, I mean, the English media, of course, many of them were somewhat dismissive of the Republic of Ireland, which, was a little bit hard to understand, because even though Ireland were going to be underdogs going into this game, and rightly so at that, I mean, Ireland had a lot of, players who were performing at the top level in the English game. I mean, for instance, Liverpool had won the league that season, and it was widely acknowledged as possibly one of the finest teams Liverpool had. And, you had Ray Houghton, you had John Aldridge performing in that team. In Scotland then, you had Packy Bonner, Chris Barris and Mick McCarthy, who, they were part of the said team that won the double up there, when the standard, I suppose, of the Scottish League was stronger than it has been in recent years. And so, and then of course you had, the Manchester United, player, namely Paul McGrath and Kevin Moore. And so, and of course the two at Tottenham, Chris Hughton and Tony Galvin. So, I mean, there was Irish players that were, performing at the highest level. I mean, Niall Quinn was breaking through at Arsenal as well. He was going to be a plus also. So, there was a feeling there that we were being kind of underestimated somewhat foolishly in that, because, I mean, if you did, look at the Irish team quite closely, one would have seen that, we did have a number of quite decent players and top level players at that. So, I mean, as I said before in the podcast, I mean, even though we were going into the tournament as underdogs, and rightly so, I mean, we weren't going to return home from the tournament with the tail between our legs, In other words, I mean, we weren't going to be, the tournament whipping boys either. So yeah, but this England game anyway, as you know, I suppose it's well documented at this stage anyway. Kind of how the game panned out. So I suppose there's little need for me to go back over the game here. Except it was a game that Ireland were fortunate to win. I mean that is acknowledged even to this day, and it goes without saying that by 99 times out of 100, I suppose if that game had been replayed, England would have won that game, and maybe won that game quite convincingly. But it was a game, kind of where I suppose Gary Lineker in particular had an off day. Of course, as it turned out, after the tournament, it emerged he was suffering from hepatitis. Maybe some of the England players maybe underestimated the Irish a little bit, and of course, allied to the fact that Ireland played with their usual traits of passion and determination and a very workman-like ethic. We even though we were pulverized in the game, we somehow ended up hanging on for a famous victory. In no small part, of course, to Ray Houghton's goal, Packy Bonner's inspired performance at the other end, and yeah, I mean, it was a good all-around team performance. Everybody rolled up their sleeves and got stuck in. It was a typical battling performance that I suppose in many ways one would associate with an FA Cup joint killing shock, in that you have a team from maybe the lower divisions playing against a top-level team, grinding out a famous victory, and a real shock result. But it was a result that, fortunate as it was, I believe it made, the rest of Europe finally sit up and take notice of, what was happening with the Republic. Because, I mean, Paul McGrath actually made a valid point after Euro 88 in an interview when he said that, in the lead up to the finals, I mean, people, were totally writing us off. I mean, even Franz Beckenbauer and indeed Bobby Robson were, dismissing our chances. But as Paul McGrath said, I mean, in the run up to that tournament, I mean, Ireland had beaten Yugoslavia, they had beaten Romania, they had beaten Bulgaria, and in fact, they'd even beaten Brazil. So, writing us off as whipping boys was, somewhat foolhardy, and it was, kind of, I suppose, in many ways, a lot of Europe being dismissive towards us. But, as things turned out, we acquitted ourselves quite well. And, after the tournament, there was a new respect for the Republic. And we certainly weren't seen as international minnows any longer at that stage.
Yes. So this historic match on June 12th, 1988, took place at Stuttgart in West Germany. So we have Paddy Bonner, Chris Morris, Mick McCarthy, Kevin Moran, Chris Hughton, Ray Houghton, Paul McGrath, Ronnie Whelan, Tony Galvin. He'd be replaced by Kevin Sheedy in the 76th minute. Captain of the side, Frank Stapleton. He'd be replaced by Niall Quinn in the 63rd minute, and John Aldridge. And for England, we have Peter Shilton, Gary Stevens, Mark Wright, Tony Adams, Kenny Sansom, Neil Webb. He'd be replaced by Glenn Hoddle in the 60th minute. Chris Waddle, captain of the side, Brian Robson, John Barnes, Gary Lineker, Peter Beardsley, and he'd be replaced by Mark Haitley in the 82nd minute. Team managed by Bobby Robson. So Ireland scored in the 6th minute through Ray Houghton. Galvin crossed from the left side. Kenny Sansom miskicked it, and John Aldridge headed it to the right side, and Ray Houghton headed it in. So it's a historic goal for Ireland, and they held on for the next 84th minute to earn this historic win.
Yeah. And indeed, that free kick that led to the Ireland goal, I mean, if you look back at it now, it was something of a needless foul by Gary Lineker on Chris Hughton. I thought anyway, looking back on it, and I mean, if you look at it on YouTube, I mean, you could come to that conclusion as well. And Then, of course, the ball was played into the box. Kenny Sansom actually, made a hash of his attempted clearance. And, after some ping pong in the air, the ball broke for Ray Houghton and he headed it into the net. And, of course, as I say, the rest is history. Even though the remainder of the first half was quite evenly contested, but in the second half, then, of course, kind of England really threw the kitchen sink at us. And, we were very lucky to survive, even though we did have one chance, kind of maybe around the hour mark when Ronnie Whelan hit the crossbar. But apart from that, that was the only chance. Other chance we had in that game. So, as I said to Paul already, it was a combination of luck, sheer doggedness, and I suppose the traditional Irish spirit of never giving up and persevering to the bitter end, and being honest and being workmanlike and being unspectacular, but I suppose getting the job done at the end of the day. And it was a combination of all those, I think, that culminated in this famous victory for the Irish.
And we can just about imagine the celebrations back home.
Yes, absolutely. And I think really after this game, Shahan, this was really the bout of what we call in Ireland the Ole Ole Brigade. In other words, the people that really wouldn't have followed soccer, or indeed would have known very little about soccer up to then, but of course qualifying for the Euros, and then in particular this win over England really was the catalyst, for, I suppose, a new culture and a new, I suppose, section of soccer supporters to emerge in Ireland, and they, of course, were to, form a significant part of the Irish travelling support and the Irish support at home, in subsequent tournaments. Just one other point as well, Shahan, about the Ireland-Indian game. Of course, even though in the euphoria of success, this wasn't immediately picked up on, but after about 10 minutes in the England game, Paul McGrath actually was shooting at goal, and he actually jarred his knee in the process. So that limited Paul's ability for the rest of the game against England, and it subsequently meant that he wasn't going to be available against the USSR.
Yes,
which was going to be a loss for the Irish.
Yes. So 3 days later, on June 15th, this time at Hanover, Republic of Ireland faced the Soviet Union. So for this match, we have Paddy Bonner, Chris Morris, Mick McCarthy, Kevin Moran, Chris Houghton, Ray Houghton, Kevin Sheedy, Ronnie Whelan, Tony Galvin, captain of the side, Frank Stapleton. He'd be replaced by Tony Casgrino in the 80th minute and John Aldridge. And the Soviet side had the Dynamo Kiev backbone with the likes of Igor Balanov, Alexei Mikhailichenko, and Alexander Zavarov, among others. So a strong side.
Yeah, and of course, Rinat Naseev.
Of course, the captain.
The best goalkeeper in the world at the time. Yeah.
Yes. So for this match, we all remember the magnificent Ronnie Whelan goal in the 39th minute, where McCarthy took a long throw in from the left side, and Ronnie Whelan scored with an overhead kick from the edge of the box. It's one of the most referenced goals and replayed goals in I guess Euros history, I would say, this particular goal.
And in many ways, Shahan, if it hadn't been for Marco van Basten's goal in the final against the USSR, I mean, Ronnie Whelan's goal could well have been the goal of the tournament.
For sure, for sure, yeah.
Even though I personally think, kind of, not being an Irishman, but I personally think, kind of that it still should have been the goal of the tournament, but there you go.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful goal for anyone who's witnessed it.
Yeah.
And
but Ronnie Whelan actually has subsequently said to him, there was an element of luck to it because the ball actually caught him on his shin.
Oh.
It wasn't really, kind of a full-blown kick as such, like, it just kind of caught him perfectly on his shin and, he just guided it in. But yeah, a spectacular goal and, one well worth looking at over and over.
Yes, the match ended as a 1-1 tie. Oleg Protasov tied the match with 15 minutes left. And yeah, at this point, Ireland were still alive as
Yeah.
in the
And
tournament.
yeah, and in many ways, Shahan, this was something of a sea change as well, in that for the first time, I think, really under Jack Charlton's leadership, Ireland kind of deviated from, the traditional, play of, closing the opposition down and, punting high balls up the field and so on. Because for this game, now whether it was preordained or not, I'm not too sure. But for once, they actually played almost like a continental team. And in many ways, this was one of the best performances they put in under, Jack Charlton's tenure as manager. In that, the style they played in this game, it was easy on the eye, and it was more akin to a continental team. And it was a game, as I said, that we really should have won. I know Ronnie Whelan scored a spectacular goal, but in actual fact, prior to the USSR getting their equaliser, I mean, we did have a couple of chances to score a second goal. Tony Galvin, I think, in particular, missed a glorious chance. So if we had got a second goal, I think we would have kicked on and won that game. But the Soviet goal then came from a rare defensive error from Kevin Moran, in that he miscontrolled the ball, and Oleg Protasov, as failed the opportunity to score in what was really one of the few chances the Soviets had in this game. And I mean, the Soviets were going into this game on a high as well, in that they had beaten Holland 3 days previously. So, as I say, it was really a game that the Irish should have won. But it still left us in a good position to qualify, because what all that meant was that if we could get a draw against the Dutch in our final game, we would be in the semi-finals.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, Shahan, if Ireland had actually beaten the USSR, we still would have required a draw against the Dutch to go through, because of the goal difference situation. In that, you see, the Dutch and the USSR both defeated England by 2 goals, whereas we beat England 1-0. So the Dutch and the USSR would have had a superior goal difference to us if there had been a 3-way tie on points.
Yes.
Which there would have been if Ireland had beaten the USSR. So I mean, as I say, we would have needed a point regardless in the last game against the Dutch to go through.
Yes.
But of course, before we move away from this, and I suppose it's worth pointing out as well, if the results really had gone to form up to this, in other words, if, say, England had beaten Ireland in the opening game, and if we had subsequently beaten the USSR, which on the balance of playing both games are results that should have happened, going into the final round of matches, all 4 teams would have been level with 1 win and 1 loss each. So it would have made for an interesting final round of games, because all 4 teams would still have been in with a chance. And I mean, if England had beaten us in the first game, England would have gone into the last game against the USSR, still with a realistic chance of qualification.
Yes.
So, very fine margins.
So for this match, like you said, the Dutch had to win to advance, while the Irish would have been satisfied with a tie. So this match on June 18th against the Dutch was at Gelsenkirchen. So
now, just one quick point as well, Shahan. If Ireland lost that game against the Dutch, they also would have gone through if England had beaten the USSR by 2 goals. But it obviously wasn't to be. But kind of, if that had happened, Ireland would have ended up going through. But as I say, it wasn't to be.
Yes. So for this match, we have Paddy Bonner, Chris Morris. He'd be replaced by Kevin Sheedy in the 80th minute, Mick McCarthy, Kevin Moran, Chris Houghton, Ray Houghton, Paul McGrath, Ronnie Whelan, Tony Galvin, captain of the team, Frank Stapleton. He'd be replaced by Tony Cascooner in the 82nd minute, and John Aldridge. And looking at the Eventual Euro champions, the Dutch, managed by Rinus Michels. We have Hans van Breukelen of PSV Eindhoven, Barry Van Arel of PSV Eindhoven, Frank Rijkaard at Real Zaragoza in Spain, Ronald Koeman at PSV Eindhoven, Adrie van Tigelen at Anderlecht, Jan Wouters at Ajax, captain of the team Ruud Gullit at AC Milan in Italy, Arnold Muren at Ajax. He'd be replaced by John Bozeman of Ajax in the 77th minute. Erwin Koeman of Mechelen. He'd be replaced by Wim Kieft of PSV Eindhoven in the 50th minute. Gerald Vandenberg of PSV Eindhoven and Marco van Basten of AC Milan in Italy. So the Dutch attacked relentlessly in this match to get a win, and they finally scored in the 82nd minute through the substitute Wim Kieft, where there was a cross on the right side that was headed out. Ronald Koeman volleyed from the edge, and the ball bounced, and Wim Kieft, he headed it, and the way he headed it, it took a bounce that went beyond Pat Bonner, and the Dutch got their win that they needed.
Yes. Well, first of all, Shad, before we discuss the game, kind of the Dutch line out you recounted there. I mean, it was a very serious outfit. Yes. It goes without saying, because I mean, backboned by players from PSV Eindhoven and Ajax, and indeed, Mechelen as well. And I mean, PSV Eindhoven, Ajax, and Mechelen, strange as it may seem now, I mean, they were three major players in the European club scene at this time. PSV had just won the European Cup. Mechelen had defeated Ajax in the Cup Winners' Cup final, and of course Ajax had won the Cup Winners' Cup the previous season. Yes. So I mean, they were really, the players that you mentioned, they were really serious players, and all thought they were a really serious team. But I mean, the game was disappointing from an Irish perspective, because in many ways, as I said, it was a game that we could have drawn. Paul McGrath had a chance after 15 minutes from a corner. A corner came in, Paul McGrath header. The ball hit the post, ricocheted back across the goal line into the arms of Hans van Breukelen. So, I mean, if that chance had gone in, it would have been a huge boost for Ireland, and Ireland may well have got a result from this game. And then, in the overall sense of the game, Holland did play the better soccer. And I mean, they tactically closed down Ray Houghton. But nonetheless, a defeat was, something of a bitter pill to take, because you outlined there the lead up to Wim Kieft's goal. Ronald Koeman obviously followed it, and it took there was a fortunate spin on the ball, and it took a couple of it changed direction when it hit the ground. But I mean, there was an offside as well in the lead up to that goal, in that as Wim Kieft headed the ball, another Dutch player was clearly in an offside position. So I mean, it could have been, the goal could have been disallowed quite easily. It could have been given as an offside, and if that had happened, of course, the Dutch would have been eliminated. Ireland would have gone through to the semi-finals, and who knows what would have happened after that. But it was cruel justice in that, kind of, it was a real battling Irish performance. Deserved a draw, but I suppose in many ways, if we had used up our share of luck against England in the opening game, the luck somewhat decepted us in this particular game against the Dutch. But I mean, to this day in Ireland, it has left, a feeling very much of what might have been. Because there is a belief in Ireland to this day, and I would even go along with this, that if we had got past the Dutch and got to the semi-finals, we may well have ended up winning the competition. Because, I mean, we would have ended up, we would have gone through as group runners-up. We would have ended up playing West Germany in the semi-finals. West Germany at that stage, they were still a little bit in transition, I thought. They were kind of building towards Italia 90. So, I mean, West Germany, I feel, in a one-off game would have been there for the taking. And in the final then, we would have been up against the USSR again, which, we had totally dominated in our group game. So there would have been nothing to fear if we had played the USSR again. So, as I say, if Ireland had got past Holland and got through to the semi-finals, I mean, goodness knows, how much further we would have gone. But as I say, it's all wishful thinking at this stage anyway. Holland, they were, I suppose they were somewhat a little fortunate to win the game, but as it turned out, that was the game that really kickstarted their drive for the title, because they went on and subsequently won the title, culminating, of course, in that never to be forgotten Marco van Basten goal in the final. But yeah, to sum up, I mean, even though we were eliminated, I mean, we ended up with 3 points, a win, a draw, and a loss. So, I mean, it was very much a case of, us holding our heads high. It gave, something of Ireland, what the Irish team was seen in a new light, a new respectful light at that by this stage. And, those, namely Franz Beckenbauer, who had written us off in quite a summarily manner prior to the tournament, were acknowledging now that we were a serious international outfit. And as it was said in Ireland, Franz Beckenbauer even done an act of contrition the following season, in that he brought his full West German side to play Ireland in Dublin in a friendly. So, which of course we'll come to in a later podcast. This actually was Liam Brady's, very much, his final appearance in an Irish jersey, apart from his testimonial. And of course, he was famously substituted infamously substituted after half an hour in this game. But as I say, all that's for a future podcast. But for now, anyway, Ireland did return from the Euros, with pride restored, and it gave the entire country a welcome impetus, because things weren't great even from an economic point of view in Ireland at this time. We were in the 1980s, and recession was rampant, and there was a lot of people leaving the country in search of employment. So it gave the Irish people a belief, that we could achieve things, with proper organisation and, a good work ethic. We could achieve things on the international stage. So all in all, yeah, a very worthwhile, exercise taking part in the Euros. And of course, it was to serve us in good stage, for the upcoming World Cup qualification campaign. We should point out as well, before we leave this, of course, a side issue. Even though this was kind of glossed over, shall we say, in the euphoria of Ireland's performances in Germany, a side issue from the Holland defeat was the re-emergence of the issue of David O'Leary's exclusion from the Irish setup, because Eamon Dunphy, who of course, as we all know, proved to be a thorn in Jack Charlton's side throughout Jack's tenure as Ireland manager. The day after the Dutch game in the Sunday Independent, Dunphy, even though I know, the Dutch goal, it was hard to be critical of any Irish individual for the Dutch goal. But, Eamon was of the view for some time at this stage that, Mick McCarthy was something of a liability in the Irish defence, in that he wasn't as skillful or as talented as David O'Leary. And Eamon used his Sunday Independent column the following day to, really castigate Mick McCarthy, and put forward I suppose something of a compelling case as to why David O'Leary should be, reinstated into the Irish setup, and that actually famously culminated in Jack Charlton actually coming across Eamon Dunphy at Dublin Airport, and letting fly a range of expletives at Eamon, and that really finished Jack Charlton's relationship with Eamon Dunphy, even though it had been strained by then. That really, I suppose, put the final nail in the coffin, as it were.
So overall, really, Ireland were the surprises of this Euros.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point you made, Paul, in that, you see, what Ireland had going for them in this tournament was kind of the surprise factor. I mean, this was their first ever international tournament, so in many ways they had nothing to lose. They had everything to gain. Well, obviously, maybe apart from the possibility of being whitewashed, But apart from that, they had everything to gain. They had nothing to lose. A lot of teams, weren't familiar with, they hadn't really taken a lot of notice of Ireland up to then, even though our results had been good. And in many ways, Ireland were able to introduce, the surprise element. And, Jack Charlton's style of play, it was, I suppose, in many ways, it was one of the first occasions that this style of play was seen at a major international tournament. And it did catch a lot of opposition teams, by surprise, in that a lot of teams, particularly the continental European teams, were used to a system of, playing out from the back, as it were, and kind of, playing the ball kind of, I suppose, maybe a leisurely place up into midfield, and then, creating the play from there. But whereas under Jack's system, everybody was man marked. There was no room to play out from the back, and a lot of continental teams found this, very difficult to adjust to. So that too would have led to us achieving the results that we obtained.
Yeah. And can you expand on Jackie Charlton's tactics, and in the sense that you still have John Aldridge up front, but he's still not scoring, but he's still a vital cog, like we mentioned last podcast.
Yeah, he's still a vital cog because, as I said in the previous podcast, Jack wanted him to kind of play a role, kind of putting the defenders under pressure, more so than rather being, a fox in the box, as it were, or a predatory goal scorer. He wanted John to kind of, as he said, kind of chase the hopeless causes, pursue opposing defenders down into corners, kind of win back, shall we say, as we call it here, the dirty ball, and apply himself that way. But yeah, he wasn't scoring, and that was becoming a major worry. And it was even affecting John's confidence a little bit, because he even said at the time, even he found it baffling in that he had little difficulty scoring at club level, and yet at international level he was unable to break his duck, even though, albeit he was playing a different system. But nevertheless, I mean, there was instances, in games where he did have a number of good opportunities, and for some reason he was unable to convert. But he finally did break his duck, the following October against Tunisia, and then the goals, started to flow regularly enough after that. So now, I mean, again, if John Aldridge had been playing for another international team, would another international manager maybe have, put up with a situation where a player, or what was seen as one of your main strikers, went on almost 30 games without scoring? That is debatable as well, But as I say, Ireland, traditionally, we didn't have a large pool of players to choose from. So anybody that established themselves on the Ireland team was really there, for as long as they wished. Unless maybe some unforeseen, shall we say, injury, or maybe falling out with the manager or whatever would have happened. But yeah, I mean, due to the lack of other striking options there, he remained very much a mainstay of the Irish team. And as time went on, of course, he was to break his goal scoring duck. And he was to prove a reliable goal scorer in the years later. But as I say, all that is for the future.
Ultimately, is it the win over England that cemented Jack Charlton's legacy with the Irish national team?
Yeah, I think it is. Because, kind of a lot of Irish fans would have been, for historical reasons as much as anything else, they would have been content with a victory over England. And then, of course, kind of the subplot to that as well of, Jack having applied for the England position back in 1977 and, not even receiving an acknowledgement of his application. I mean, that would have, even though he never said it publicly, that no doubt would have bugged him to an extent. And that would have served, as a motivating factor for him as well, to, put one over on the English, as it were, and, prove to them that, even though his style of play was limited and he did have its detractors, it was capable of getting results, at the highest level where it really mattered. So yeah, I think that would have been kind of the overriding, sentiment there. Yeah. But just actually, Paul, while you're there, just to get a quick your take on it, like, just moving to England for a moment. Like, do you think yourself that, as we all know, of course, Bobby Robson and the players, came in for severe criticism in the aftermath of the Euros. But do you think yourself that maybe some of that criticism that they came in for was a little unjustified? In that, okay, I mean, England did play poorly against the USSR, but I mean, the game against Holland was a game that, was there for the taking. It wasn't even enough game. And the game against Ireland, with, kind of by the law of averages, in normal circumstances, England would have won that game and won that game quite well. So do you think maybe that, Bobby Robson and the England players were, they were the subject maybe of someone wanted criticism?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was the old thing of the press building them up and looking them down again, and the reaction, I think, to the Ireland game was really over the top and probably affected them for the rest of the tournament. And it wasn't a great performance, but I don't think England underestimated Ireland either, as we've said. There were a lot of those Irish players playing right at the top level of English football. We've seen Ireland were on a long unbeaten run, known to be very hard to beat, very good defensively. It was always going to be a tight game, and Ireland scoring early, was a big factor in that. But a lot of that criticism was over the top, and I think you're right. They actually played well against Holland and hit the post with the free kick that could have changed the game as well. But overall they underperformed, but it was over the top.
But and still, kind of in the normal run of events, kind of if all things being equal, kind of England could have done reasonably well. Like, they could have been certainly in the shake-up of qualifying for the semi-finals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they qualified really well.
That would be just my take on it. But just very quickly as well, Paul, do you think though that Bobby Robson and maybe the English FA made an error in the lead up to Euro 88 in that when they played the Dutch in a friendly at Wembley the preceding March? I mean, considering that they were going to play him again in the Euros themselves, do you think maybe that was an error, that they should have avoided playing the Dutch at in the spring of 1988?
Yeah, that's possible as well. Yeah, I think it was more comments in the press, and I think Brian Clough, as he occasionally did, and probably wound up the Irish team and gave them a bit of extra motivation. I think it was Mick McCarthy in particular that he was singling out before the game. I don't think I'd be surprised if the team or the management had really underestimated Ireland. And as you say, that game could have had a very different outcome. But I don't think they recovered from that.
Yeah, because I mean, then you had other pundits in Britain, like Ian St. John, for instance, and I mean, they were quietly, they were quietly confident of Ireland's chances in the tournament itself. So I mean, those that were in the know and were following kind of the Irish performances and the Irish results, as I said already, they would have known that Ireland weren't going to West Germany just to make up the numbers. But then I suppose it's like something you said, Paul, in previous podcasts, that maybe Ireland, reports of Irish matches in the English media maybe did not get a lot of coverage. And maybe that fed into kind of, I suppose, maybe the perception that Ireland were going to be there to be rolled over, basically.
Yeah, the run of friendlies that we've discussed, there was next to no coverage of them. I mean, it sounds like there wasn't a great deal in Ireland, some of them, there was very little in England. Yeah. Because
I know for a fact, for instance, that Ireland were due to play the USSR in a friendly in April of 1988, but when we were drawn against the USSR in the Euros, I mean, that friendly was scrapped, and we ended up playing Yugoslavia instead. And I think by the time 1990 rolled around, Bobby Robson and the English FA had learnt their lesson, because England were due to come to Lansdowne Road in March 1990 for a friendly, but seeing that we had been drawn against each other in the World Cup, that friendly was scrapped as well.
Yeah, it might have been sensible not to have played the Dutch,
yeah. Now, obviously, in 1990, the official reason given out was the fact that the possibility of hooligan supporters coming to Dublin, but maybe there was a factor that Bobby Rodden by that stage did not want to let Jack Charlton see his hand, and vice versa as well.
Yeah, I think it would rarely happen now, would it? The two teams would meet before a tournament.
Yeah, because even nowadays, I mean, there are provisos when teams line up friendlies that if they do draw each other, in upcoming international tournaments, that if they have friendlies lined up against each other, that they necessarily are cancelled. But again, all wishful thinking, almost 35 years on at this stage. Yeah.
So, in closing, was there a feeling that this had been a one-off, or was there a feeling that Ireland could build up on this participation?
Very much the latter, Shahan. There was a feeling that Ireland could build up because, the World Cup qualifying draw had also taken place by now. And Ireland, as we'll see in the future podcast, when we discuss this World Cup qualification, Ireland were drawn with Spain, Hungary, Northern Ireland and Malta. And there was a feeling that Ireland were capable of qualifying for the World Cup because naturally, Spain were going to be the big hitters in the group, but Hungary was somewhat in decline, as indeed were Northern Ireland by this stage. So, World Cup qualification in many ways, was going to be, I suppose if you were to assume that Spain would qualify automatically, it was going to be a straight shootout between ourselves, Hungary and Northern Ireland. And there was a feeling by this stage that, if we could continue, the upward momentum we had shown up to now, which culminated, of course, in the performances at Euro 88. And if we could take that into the World Cup qualifiers, there was no reason why we could not qualify for the World Cup. Because remember, there was going to be two teams qualifying for the World Cup, so qualification was going to be a little bit easier. And as I said already, Hungary and Northern Ireland were sort of, they were regressing at this stage. So, I mean, there was an opportunity there for us to, qualify for a World Cup and really make our mark on the world stage by then. And of course, it did go a long way as well, kind of towards silencing, Jack Charlton's critics, once and for all, in that, criticism remained of him, but for the next number of years anyway, the criticism tended to be somewhat muted, apart maybe from, the occasional journalists like, say, Eamon Dunphy and so on, but, the performances in Germany kind of gave belief, to the fact that even though Jack Charlton's style of play, was limited, and it was, it wasn't pleasing on the eye. It was capable of getting results, which is what international, football was all about in those days, and still very much is today. Of course, it's a results-driven business.
Yes. So with that, once again, we would like to thank you for your participation in this series. As always, for everyone to feel free to leave questions and comments. For any questions and comments, all our contact information is listed in the blog and podcast uploads. So thank you, and we'll see you for the next season, 88,
yeah,
89.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, thank you once again to you and to Paul. And of course, the very best of luck both to England and the US, and indeed all the other teams as well, and at the World Cup, and hopefully it will be a fantastic tournament.
Indeed.
Yeah, and we'll enjoy the games anyway. Okay, yeah.
Thanks again. Yeah.
Okay, no problem at all. Take care, lads.
Okay. Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.